Good evening, Eugene. How are you?
I'm great, Jana. How are you tonight?
Great, great. So we haven't seen much of this in the media. We haven't seen details of what we're going to cover tonight, but it really is an important topic, and it's the program for government that was released just recently. And we're going to walk through that program for government, some of the policies and some of their aims, so the public can be aware of what's in store for possibly the next 5 years. So I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, so here it is. We'll have a link in the description. There's the link on the screen as well. So you can get this and take a look at it yourself. This is the cover to it. So we're going to unpack the 2025 program for government, focused on what would be of interest to parents, specifically, around education and related things to education. This is kind of a summary of the headlines, and we'll go through each of these. It's just to give you a kind of an overview of the things that we'll be talking about. The banning of conversion practices, the whole gender equality, diversity, equity, inclusion capture of the third level education. It's being reaffirmed. The SPHE rollout and teacher training has been reaffirmed. Ireland is putting a huge emphasis on the rollout of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. Huge. It's enormous and affects education. The Irish state are going to get into the preschool business. So that's called out in this. And then critical race theory is back under a new name, subconscious bias. So we'll cover that as well. So this just give you a high level of what we'll be talking about. The first one here, Jana, comes from page 20. I'm just putting it up on the basis of the whole notion of diversity, equity, inclusion. And I think one point I'll make before we get into the other ones is that while we don't have a Green Party in government at the moment, it doesn't look like it's made much of a difference to the policies in the program for government, because they all look like the Green Party was involved in them. I'll put it to you that way. They're all neo-communist, woke policies, as we might call them. And that's what we'll see in the document. So even though they're not represented in the actual government, they are represented in the program for government, as we'll see. So that's a theme. And here it is: diversity and inclusion in the financial services sector, support for women. And I'm sure it's support for people who identify as women as well, because that's the general theme when you look through the document. So that's just the first one. Here it is, the accelerating. So we're trying to accelerate the 17 Sustainable Development Goals for Agenda 2030, as it's called, which is a real agenda. A bigger agenda than perhaps people appreciate. And of course, two of the ones of interest to the people reading this presentation is SDG 4, which is education. And I would probably claim that when it comes from UNESCO, it's closer to indoctrination than education when you get it from UNESCO, basically. And SDG 5, which is the gender equality. And we're going to do a separate video on gender equality so that people can understand exactly what it means. And it doesn't quite mean what you think it means. And we'll cover that in another video. And here it is: support the work of young people to help them in the community. So they want to get people, they really want to go hard on young people. The indoctrination of our younger generation, starting from preschool through to leaving certs and even university, is enormous. So the government are giving money to anybody and everybody who will get involved in indoctrinating children into the SDGs. This is basically what's going on here. Now, there's other SDGs as well, which affect farming. They affect everything in our life. They're hugely intrusive. So people need to wake up to this. We are basically probably one of the best in the class, I would say, in terms of adopting the Sustainable Development Goals on the planet.
At a recent Davos meeting, they were talking about how with the Sustainable Development Goals and Agenda 2030, globally, they were only at, I think it was less than 20%, but Ireland was pushing towards, I believe the number was 80%. So Ireland is the best in class for pushing this Agenda 2030 Sustainable Development Goals, the good boy in class, according to the globalist. We know there's funding behind it. And I do believe that if Ireland had a program like the Department of Government Efficiency, DOGE, like the US, shining a real bright spotlight on all of this, there would be some pretty horrific things exposed as to the money behind pushing this into the children, women, and families in Ireland.
Yeah, absolutely. Because when you've got a woke agenda, a neo-communist agenda like this, money gets thrown out and spent on everything. And the grifters, you get a whole load of grifters selling their critical race theory or selling the SDGs or whatever. It just attracts that kind of people, unfortunately, and people are making money from it. And of course, all our mainstream media are getting funded for it as well to promote it. So you're not going to hear anything negative from them about this whole thing. I don't think we should be best in the class here, because that means we're going to waste money. We're going to cripple our country. We're going to cripple our agriculture, indoctrinate our kids, and reduce the level of real education in our schools, just to comply with which is a fundamental communist agenda coming from the United Nations that Irish people need to wake up to. If the Greens were in power, we wouldn't be doing anything different. That we wouldn't, if there was a Green government, a Green Taoiseach, heaven forbid, they'd be doing the exact same thing as most of the things in this programme for government. I'm sorry. So let's move on. The next one, early childhood education. So, I mean, I think there's a lot of help that's needed for parents on this front in terms of the costs involved and mitigating those costs and giving whatever tax reliefs and whatever things they can do. I think the notable thing I'm putting here is that the government want to get involved in early childhood education. And some of that may be from a positive perspective, but I'd always have a suspicion as well, because when you've got a communist type government in power, children is their main target. Communists and fascists are the exact same in terms of how they want to deal with education. They want to indoctrinate kids, and they want to do it from as young an age as possible. And unfortunately, that's the government we have right now, because they're just following the principles from UNESCO. So while there might be a positive end to this, I think parents need to be wary as well, because there's other agendas at play.
Yep. If the government really cared about making childcare affordable or helping families, why wouldn't they honor the Constitution, which says that no one should be forced into the workplace out of economic necessity? So why wouldn't they make it easier for mothers like myself to be able to stay home and raise children, or fathers in that case? So if they really cared about the family and wanted to ease financial burden, why wouldn't they be implementing policy and legislation to make it easy for one parent to stay home and raise those young children? Because they want to farm them out to these state-led facilities and start indoctrinating them from early childhood.
Yep, 100%. Yep. Teach them what their gender identity is in preschool. So continue to implement the SPHE, RSE curriculum. So no change in TAC here, right? Which I'm not kind of surprised, to be honest, because if you're following the SDGs, you're going to continue on the current path. So now the other point I want to make here, there's this strange comment which is in the programme for government: hold a convention bringing together all stakeholders in education. Now, typically when that happens, that tends to be a coming together of all of the leftist NGOs who have some sort of stake in education. That's what that tends to be when we've seen it in the past. And I don't think that that's going to be any different in the future. So it's basically, let's all get together and see how other things we can indoctrinate into the kids, and get all the leftist NGOs involved, get TENI in, Belong to, get the National Women's Council in, perhaps, because to push the whole gender equality agenda. That's what I see when I look at that, and not something that's actually going to be positive from a parent's perspective. So a concern on that one. The school books are going to continue to provide the free school books. I think that in itself isn't an issue. I think the issue with the free school books is that they're not certified by the department. So taxpayers' money is being spent on books which are not certified. Like, that's ridiculous. As a taxpayer, you can't be happy with that. And the other point is that means those books are a free-for-all. Anything could be in those books, because the department aren't standing behind them. They're not saying this book is in line with the curriculum. So it's an open book, basically, to put anything into those books, and the taxpayer's paying the money for them. So that has to change, in my opinion. And the other thing is, parents must have unfettered access to the books in whatever way that is. They could have an electronic version online, which some of the publishers actually do provide that, which is great.
Gileducation.ie has provided all of their SPHE books online, and that's how we came across the book, for example, that wasn't signed off by anyone that we know of. Parents didn't see it, and that book, for example, was written by a teacher, Owen Cleary, and it has 8 pages on masturbation. It has class contracts, I don't think any parent out there would be happy with their tax money going towards a book like that. And that book stays at school because there's no homework for these SPHE books.
Yeah, exactly. And you see the answer then you get when you contact the department. Well, that's nothing to do with us. We don't certify the
Mm-hmm.
books. You have to go and deal with the book company. That's basically the answer. And this
Yeah.
is the same response you'll get from the journal.ie. Oh, that's not in the curriculum.
Mm-hmm.
The books aren't part of the curriculum, etc. I'm sorry, guys. You need to get in line, get this sorted out properly. And parents need to be. This is one of the things that we will
Mm-hmm.
capture in one of our future campaigns, because this needs to happen. Um, so let's move
Absolutely.
on.
And Eugene, I'll just comment that in addition to the school books that are inappropriate, the toolkits online are equally horrific. I had my school principal send me all the materials that my children aged 6 and 9 were going to be learning for SPHE, including a toolkit. I looked at the link, went through all of the documents with a fine-tooth comb, only to find that age 5 junior infants in the toolkit can be taught transgenderism, transphobic bullying, lesbian, gay, bisexual, and all the rest for age 5 when they haven't even learned to read and write. So parents need to stay on top of what's in the school. They need to be asking to see those books because they're not appropriate.
If people have been following our Corruption of Education series, the new one where we've got these shorter videos, where I guess we're showing you where the root of that comes from, why the education
Mm-hmm.
material is like that, both from the WHO and the UNESCO influence, and also the influence of the people like Bill Gates and the Rockefellers who are basically behind pushing those agendas and sexualizing kids and
Mm-hmm.
paying for transgender propaganda, basically, to be brought into schools. So those are the people who are doing it
Mm-hmm.
through and using UNESCO basically as a kind of a go-between, a proxy for them. And of course, everybody in Ireland, all the government in Ireland will do anything the United Nations tell them to do or anything UNESCO tell them
Mm-hmm.
to do. And then they'll quote these standards and say, oh, we were just following the standards, right? Standards that aren't fit
Yeah.
for purpose. So if you haven't seen those standards, we've covered them in other videos. We're not going to talk about them here. And it's very clear, if you follow those standards, you're going to have horrendous books in the library and in the schoolroom because they won't be
Mm-hmm.
appropriate. Okay, next one here is gender equality. And we will have a different or separate video to talk about it. The reason for the graphic on the right-hand side here is because when they talk about gender equality, they're talking about the socially constructed gender, the postmodern feminist theory, queer theory version of gender, which has been promoted by the likes of Bill Gates, the Melinda and Bill Gates Foundation, by people like George
Mm-hmm.
Soros. These are the people funding this thing, again, proxying it through the UNESCO and the United Nations and the WHO to give it some sort of credence. And unfortunately, that's what we're talking about here. So the government here are looking to continue to enforce this Athena Swan program, which demands that our third level education adopts this view of gender equality. And it's not equal rights for women. Unfortunately, it's the exact opposite. It just isn't.
Mm-hmm.
But it's bringing in diversity, equity, inclusion. It's bringing in the Marxist, rigid control regime into our universities, basically, to push out all the people who don't agree with Marxism and communism, and just bring in this totally woke, hard left agenda into our universities and destroy scholarship. Scholarship in the universities is destroyed now. It's ending up creating graduates. The only job they can get is in an NGO, because you wouldn't want them in your corporation. You're not going to want one of these radical troublemakers coming into your business, because they're not going to be functional employees. I certainly wouldn't have them.
No.
And I think most of the multinationals are copping onto this as well. There's a big movement in the US, Jana, you probably haven't seen it, that a lot of companies now are steering away from graduates coming from the Stanford universities and all the mainstream universities, because they're all woke and they're useless.
So any parent listening who thinks that this nonsense is helpful to children, while the rest of the world and the other superpowers across the pond are getting rid of DEI, we've seen that Amazon's peeling back, Google, I think JP Morgan, lots of big companies are peeling back. Ireland is still firing ahead. So the children in Ireland are going to come out of school and university as dumbed down social justice warriors who will not have any competitive edge in the global job market. That's not what we want for the future of our children in Ireland.
Absolutely. And the positive reputation of Irish graduates that's been built up over time is going to be destroyed in the years ahead by this. And we know that Donald Trump is going to want to repatriate a lot of these companies back to the US in terms of their research and development and stuff like that. And the reason they would stay here is because of the quality of graduates here. And the fact that we're, our location in Europe, etc., is still a positive, regardless of the tax rate. But if we don't have good graduates either, and they like, you know, you look to Ireland and all the graduates are woke in Ireland, but we're going to lose that advantage, and those companies are going to leave. And this is the reality.
Yep.
We should be doing the exact opposite to what is in page 98 here of the Programme for Government. Let's talk about the banning of conversion practices, Jana, because that's another thing. Again, we covered this in detail. It's in the Programme for Government. And the thing that people need to know, this is not just gay conversion. They're talking about bringing gender identity into the scope of the conversion practice. And when you do that, it's outrageous. It really is outrageous. And we have a whole video that covers why it's outrageous.
Norma Foley was very clear as she went out and said she's investing in psychologists to go into the schools. If this bill goes through and a child is gender confused and they go see a professional defined as an educator, could be psychiatrist, counselor in school, that counselor, that teacher must take an affirmative approach, not explore why they're confused, not contact their parents. If they do that, they can be fined up to €10,000. They must affirm the child is trans or the gender, whatever gender identity or expression they identify as, could be a furry or whatever the next trend is. So this is dangerous. Think of a conveyor belt. Kids go into school, they get confused in the class, they see the counselor, they come out trans. It's going to spin trans kids or trans identifying kids out of those schools quicker than people are going to know what to do with. So this is lethal. This is state-sponsored child abuse right here, this prohibition of conversion therapy. Watch that podcast. It's chilling.
Yeah. And since we did the podcast, of course, there's been a changing of the guard. And now we have a new Minister for Education whose husband is a director in ADVI who make puberty blockers. Let's move on. Page 99 of the document. Continue to implement training programs within our education system to address racism and unconscious bias. So this is basically critical race theory under a different guise, a different name. And we know that because they've got a Marxist person, academic, who's now priming up the whole anti-racism campaign in Ireland. And again, this is a great place for grifters who want to make money out of doing these courses in schools, etc., telling kids that they all have white privilege and all that. So this shouldn't be in the plan at all. This is outrageous. And I'm sorry, guys, you're going to manufacture racists by what you're doing. That's what you're doing, guys, by what you're doing. Between the policy on migration and bringing this into the classroom, you're just going to make a problem that didn't exist previously, and you are making it. So just to highlight for people that this is coming to your school near you. I'm sure EJA or the NCCA will be rolling this out gladly. So let's look at some of the other things here, and you can look at the other things here. Intercultural events, trying to put a positive spin on the uncontrolled migration that we have right now. That's what they're trying to do here. All of us know and have worked with people who come through the migration process legally, and we don't have any issue with those people. In fact, we love those people. They're our friends, they're our colleagues in work, etc. They came through a proper process. The people coming through right now are not coming through a proper process, and trying to dress that up and say that anything disinformation or you're far right because you disagree with it is nonsense. It's destroying the country, and it's destroying Europe at the moment because it's coming from Europe. The policy is coming from Europe. It's a communist, it's a blatant communist globalist policy, and I'm sorry, we shouldn't be doing it. So trying to pretend it's something else and that we're all racists is nonsense. I'm sorry, one of the least racist countries in the world. If you want to look for racism, you go to Africa, or you go to the Far East, or you go to a Muslim country, and you'll find racism in spades. Of course, they don't want to say that, right? I'm sorry. So let's move on. There's a total contradiction on page 138, where they talk about advocate internationally for the education and safety of women and girls.
As a woman who is the mother to a little girl, I personally don't feel safe to go into a toilet or changing room knowing there could be a man next to me, nor do I feel safe that my daughter, who plays sports, might be competing against a man identifying as a woman. That is not safe. That is not fair. It's nonsensical. And it's really time to say enough is enough on this. It's not safe or fair.
Yeah. 100%. So then there's a 138 more on climate. Again, we would need to be best in the class on climate. And again, this is a total contradiction, because if you do all the SDGs and you reduce your level of agriculture, if you reduce your fundamental independence in terms of food provision and power generation, because you cannot create all your power from renewables. You just can't, because the wind doesn't blow every day, the sun doesn't shine every day. You have to have other power sources. And we don't have, right now, we don't have a plan B right now. So if you're just going to rely on total renewables all the time, we're not going to be independent and resilient from a power perspective. We won't be resilient from a food perspective if we stop our own agriculture production in this country. The Western world, unfortunately, has outsourced and offshored the majority of its production to the east, right, and to a large extent to China. And that means you don't have resilience. Like, what if you end up in a war situation and your production of fundamental day-to-day products you don't have in your own country, or you don't have in the EU? It's outrageous. These people are destroying Western society, unfortunately. So people need to wake up to this thing and look at the economic factors here, as well as the climate and all the green aspects of it, because there's hard reality in terms of your ability to survive in a situation where you may have a conflict with an aggressive neighbor. So, and we found that out. That hit Germany during the Ukraine war, where they basically now were getting the majority of their power from Russia. And Germany had to do a very quick change to turn that around. So you don't want that sort of situation. So here we are at the United Nations Agenda 2030. It's on page 140. It's so good they have to say it twice, so they're going to recommit to it on page 140 as well. I guess the question to people watching this video is, we focused, I suppose, on things that would affect education. An awful lot of this stuff does affect education. The SDGs affect education, because there's a massive push to indoctrinate our young children to accept all of this stuff as if it's all 100%, including SDG 5 on gender equality. And that's why they're basically saying, well, you wouldn't, why you can't be against gender equality now? Why you don't want equal rights for women? See the way, right? It's presented in a way that makes it look that you're the bad person for disagreeing with it. That's it, Janice. So people leave a comment, and we'll have a link to the document in the description, and any other kind of links we might have alluded to as well. We'll have some of the United Nations SDG links as well, so you can check those out.
That's great. Hope everyone enjoyed this. And we have to ask ourselves, do we want another 5 years of this? No, we don't. So we need to continue to stand up, push back, but hopefully get this government out and at a better one in the future. Have a great night.